Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Church Tech Chat. I'm Brian, and I'm a parish minister in the Church of Scotland in Lanark, in Scotland, funnily enough. And we are on week 6. 5. 5. Week 6 is still to come. Week 5 of our Church Tech Chat. And this week, we are thinking about putting it all together. And with me, as always, are our friends and colleagues. We have Neil and we have Jeremy. Good afternoon to you both.
Good afternoon.
Neil, where are you?
Well, very technically, I'm at home, as you can probably tell.
Oh, that's disappointing.
Pamela, the palm branch, and the cat scratcher. But I have been out and about this week. Here's where I was yesterday. This is, and where I'll be Saturday and Sunday. This is the Royal Highland Show. It's not open to the public this year because of COVID, but they are live streaming it. Although, interestingly, I'm not live streaming. Other folks are doing that. Somewhat bizarrely.
This could go wrong, Neil. You're not live streaming, and you're showing a picture of sheep shearing.
Somewhat bizarrely, I run one of the very few sheep scoring timing systems in the world, and available for hire. If anyone happens to need a sheep shearing competition scoring timer system, I am your man. I'm just going to take advantage of this slot to punt my wares to the world. Those screens, the timer, flags, all of that stuff is Sanctus Media product. And you're welcome to hire us if you have any sheep needing sheared competitively. Then I am your man. Someone has to do it. Neil, someone has to do it, and it just so happens you are lucky enough that you know the guy who does it.
I was going to say that bit that you say that other products are available, but there aren't really in this situation. It is you. And I mean, somebody once said to me that, Neil and Sanctus Media can be a bit niche at times. And I said, no. Absolutely. They also do sheep shearing timers. Yeah, and
exactly. My family sometimes struggle to explain what I do for a living.
No idea why.
I get that.
no idea why. Okay, so that was interesting.
So that's where I am this week, and that's where I'll be Saturday, Sunday. You can watch it live on YouTube, Royal Highland Showcase. Google that, and you can watch the sheep shearing live if you're so interested.
And most importantly, check out the sexy timers.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, that's incredible.
Nobody saw that coming, did they? Nobody saw it coming.
No, we really did. We normally have a wee conversation about things and beforehand, and none of us knew that the sheep shearing was a thing. We just thought you were there as admirer of sheep shearing.
Well, and actually, neither of us even asked the question. It just seemed exactly the sort of.
Yeah. Jeremy, at what point would you say, so Neil, tell me, is that your timer on those boards? Oh, dear. Sanctus Media, changing the world, one sheep shearing and soul at a time. Well, absolutely. Good. So, listen, it's been a long year. It's been a long summer so far, and it looks like the summer's going to continue for a bit. And we were just talking about that challenge when time kind of meshes into each other and we're not perhaps going to get away on holiday as much. But what are you looking forward to right now? I think for me, it's maybe a little bit of downtime over the summer, but I'm not sure it's going to. I'm not good at taking advice and taking time off when I'm sitting in the house with a computer and can play. Jeremy, what about you? What are you looking forward to? You've got some changes coming up as well, haven't you?
Yes, I have. We'll be moving. Moving from a rural post in Suffolk with 6 churches in villages to a combined rural and new housing development in Oxfordshire. So going from kind of east and a bit north of London to west and a bit more north of London. So I seem to be surrounded by people quoting for removals and totting up just how many boxes and all of that. But there is going to be a break. I'm going to be driving to Inverness of all places. So wish me and particularly my car good luck with that.
Inverness, we know that journey. We do know that journey. Yes. How long are you going there for? Is it a nice break?
Just for a week, but we're having a big sort of family get together. So we're converging by all sorts of different means. So what could possibly go wrong?
Indeed.
I'm grateful for you not starting. I've already got my list of all the things.
No. We weren't going to add to that. What about you, Neil? You've had a busy few weeks with cables and
I'm looking forward to retiring. Sadly, I have some 18 years or so to go before that's happening, but that's really what I'm looking forward to. No, I mean the summer is a quieter time. If nothing else, our clients go on holiday, and so that makes for the phone ringing less often, or tasks being done less often. As we know, God goes on holiday too, so lots of churches slim down, services get shorter, all the evening things stop because God's also on holiday. So that's really helpful for me. I appreciate that he does that. So that's gives a wee bit quieter time looking into the summer. But actually, the Royal Highland Show is the last kind of big event of probably the academic ecclesiastical year ending in June. So it does get quieter into July before in end of July the synods pick up again, meetings, and then the church world picks back up again come September, and everything else kicks off again in earnest.
Yeah, I've always said that God does take a good few weeks holiday, and that's important. Yeah, it's important for everyone, I think. But yes, we've had quite a good journey over these last few weeks on thinking about mission and tech and different things, and it's been really interesting to share these conversations with you. And we've another one which will take place next Thursday. That's the 24th of June. Thinking about this is just the beginning. Where do we go from here, and how do we actually use all this stuff to make a difference in the real world, in our lives, in our churches and our congregations. So that'll be next week on the 24th. So please do remember, we have our questions that you can put. I don't know why I pointed there because it's on my screen right there, but somewhere you'll have questions. If you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube, that's right, somewhere. Just type your questions and any comments that you've got, and we'll think about them as we perhaps get to the end of today. But today is about putting it all together, things we've talked about and how that makes a difference. So I'm just going to share a few thoughts for a minute, and we'll see Neil and Jeremy in a few minutes. But what does it mean to put things together? Do you know, one of the challenges that we have in church and perhaps in ministry is competing expectations. How do you start something new when you've got everything else that's going on? There's a tendency to panic at times as well when we look around and we think that perhaps we're not doing what other people are doing and we need to jump in and get this done. And we've spoken over the past few weeks about different things, from cables and cameras to thinking about why we're doing things. We've also spoken about some of the challenges about, not just sticking a camera in the corner of the sanctuary and hitting go when we're ready to go. We've talked about being more intentional with what we're doing so that those who are joining us aren't just watching on from afar, but are actually part of that community, part of that experience. But what is that experience? It's not just worship. It's more. It's about study. It's about nurture. It's about groups, as we thought about last week. But how do we put that together as a church family? How do we begin to draw all these threads together to give us some sort of mission strategy going forward that makes use of what we've inherited and also what we are bringing new to the table? How do we get that balance right of being tied to the things that people enjoy, people like, and thinking about how we reach others? I remember having a discussion once with a member of mine who was saying, all this new stuff's all very well, but why don't we just do what we've done because it's really good? We like it. And I did think for a while, yeah, we do like it. We like going to church. We like listening to a sermon. Well, I hope some of folks like doing that. We like singing. We like that collective idea of worship, of church life. But you know, if it was truly working, we'd be in a very different place. Our churches would be filled. If it was truly working, then there would be a hustle and bustle around all of our buildings each and every week. Every time we opened the doors, people would be queuing because there was something that they wanted to engage in. We do enjoy it as church, but perhaps we haven't quite thought through why our churches are not bustling or heaving at the seams. Why are we not missing, or why are we not taking account of some of that? And I take myself in that as well. So to put everything together, we need to draw from the things that we enjoy, the things that have brought us to faith, that have nurtured our faith, that have drawn us deeper into a relationship with God, and somehow translate them into this new technology, into this new communication model where we are able to have direct access to people, where we are able to talk to people in their living room, in their bedroom, on a train, on a walk. There was a wonderful person in our congregation who goes out running regularly, and during I think it was the first lockdown, she was out running on a Sunday morning, and she decided she would watch the service live. And we weren't broadcasting that day because, in fact, I think it was Pentecost, where the moderator of the General Assembly, our good friend Martin, had produced a service and had encouraged people to broadcast it at the same time so that everyone could do it. And we did that as a number of churches in the area. And as she was running along through one of the areas of woodland, there was a lady walking towards her, walking a dog, and she had her phone in her hand, and she didn't have headphones in, and she was listening to something. And as our member ran past, she knew exactly what that person was watching. That random person in a random place, on a random walk, met by somebody doing a random run an hour earlier than they would normally do on a Sunday, were both watching the same service live at the same time. These are why we do this, or this is why we do this type of thing, because we never know the reach it might have. So as we think today about all those challenges that we've got, I want to leave us with one thing before we get on to the nuts and bolts of how we put this stuff together, how we look at new and contemporary and old and traditional worship, and how we look at the way that we produce that. What is it that you're willing to put down in order to do this work? Because we can't overburden ourselves. We can't take on something else on top of that which we already do. So in order to put all this together, in order to develop this new form of church, this new style of worship, this new way of forming relationships with people in very, very different places, we need the time and we need the space. And there will be those that like the inherited model of church, and those who expect that to continue, and those who engage with the new form of church. And this is going to be a tension going forward in our minds and in our life and in our ministry for years to come. But we need to grasp it. And we need to think, as we put all this together and put it into practice, what do we have time to put down? Jeremy's going to come and share with us some of his thoughts on this section, on how we are actually going to put all this stuff together. There's a lot, Jeremy. There's a lot to bring together, and we know that you are the man to guide us through this right now. Have fun.
let's set some expectations here, maybe. So let me just flip that around for a second. Excuse me. There's that web, when I put it on the slide, seemed like a really good thing. It looks slightly sinister as I'm looking at it at the moment. But I could talk when we're thinking about, well, how do we do this? How do we do digital church? How do we have digital services? What are we going to do next? The digital domain is full of choices. And one of the things about normal life is if you want to go and choose a car, to a pretty large extent, if you've got a budget and you've got a small number of things in mind, like how many wheels tends to be a bit of a given, how many doors, how much storage capacity, what kind of fuel, there's a small number of dimensions, and you can imagine your dream car, but you can't have your dream car. You have to work within some constraints. In the digital world, those constraints are much more fluid, and you can do almost anything. And I speak to so many ministers who just have a sense of complete overwhelm, that they don't know how to navigate those choices. So my objective in this little session is to bring you some news from one particular ministry front, which is mine. So as I mentioned, I'm presently in a rural context. There are 6 village churches that I oversee. There's a team. There are small congregations in each, and we're trying to do God's work in that place. But let me wind back. I did my training for ministry back in the aughts, and everyone then agreed that the present shouldn't be seen as a kind of a disappointing echo of the past. Because definitely when I was training, there was a consciousness that it felt like the church was just on the slide. Every measure that you looked at, most of those measures, certainly looking in our context, were just going, when we want them to go up and to the right, they were just going drifting down. So of course there's a tendency to look back and try and find, how do we, where did we go wrong? How can we take a journey that went wrong? How can we go and take a new path? And in training colleges, everyone agreed, well, you mustn't think like that. The future won't be like the present. We won't find it in the past. But maybe to construct that future, we need to go and reconstruct the best of how the church has thought about itself and its mission and ministry in the past. There are lessons to learn. But there was also a sense there were new movements everywhere to discover what church should be today. And also, in that context of ministry training, however people were describing the problem, some could describe it at great length. Wherever they looked for solutions, or in some cases people had the answer. I've seen the answer and they had their own particular ideas. But everyone agreed one thing, which is churches resist change. We just do. It's hardwired, I think, into the institution. Perhaps it's built on the fact that so much of what we do is around buildings. Even if we don't think of the building as first and foremost the church, nevertheless, so many of the practicalities come from something which seems solid and fixed and unchanging. So we find change hard, but change has actually come in the middle of a global trauma, and it hasn't come evenly and it hasn't come consistently, and it's not always welcomed, but it is undeniable. So we can live differently, we can worship differently, we can work differently, we can relate differently, we can think differently, and we're all discovering that. So that's a bewildering context, or it's an exciting context. I just want to help you navigate some of the choices that confront us. But I should say this is work in progress. I don't pretend to be some great expert. I'm just one of so many ministers, so many congregations trying to navigate this. But I have, in these months, grown in confidence about what the questions might be. So that's what I'm going to share really is some questions, and encourage you to think about some of those questions explicitly, to give you a little bit of a framework for that, I hope, that might be useful. It's been useful in my context, and I hope it might be useful in yours as well. So here's a framework, or here's the content really I'm going to work through. Whoops, I need to switch that around so you can see it. I'm going to look at 4 balance points, places where there isn't necessarily a right answer, but there are different directions, there are different points of balance that we might choose, and where if we're not careful, they just will wobble because we haven't thought about it. But if we use those balance points, perhaps we can reduce those many bewildering choices to a small number of meaningful choices that will help us into the future. So I'm going to talk about the mode. In particular, I'm thinking about live and as live experiences, and I'll talk a bit more about that, because that's been our focus. It's just been where we've gone to as a group of churches far more than recorded. So hopefully there are some things relevant for churches who've gone into recorded services or other kinds, but our focus has been live. I'll talk a bit about forms in digital services, choosing between a more liturgical approach and a more topical approach, if you like. One majors on structures and forms and shapes that we've inherited and are familiar with in a church context. The other starts from, what are we trying to do here? What's our topic? What's our focus? I'll talk a bit about style and the balance between consistency, which is an important value, and creativity, which is another. Both of those have the tendency, if you like, to become, people think of what is normal to them as normal to everybody. So that can be a point of tension or a point of discovery. And finally, I'll talk about two mindsets for the digital world. A mindset of mapping, which is about discovering a world different than the world we know. So we then have clarity about where we are. We feel more comfortable in that place and we can navigate it. And another explorer approach, where we're exploring and interacting in a culture. We're changing in that world. And I think those two different mindsets both exist in the church. They can lead us to different conclusions, and recognizing them has been important for my particular churches. So let's start with that question of mode. Oops. And as I mentioned, we've focused on live for practical reasons, really, more than theoretical or theological decisions particularly. We made decisions quickly at the beginning of the crisis. We changed and adapted as we went, and we learned. And of course, the immediate question was, well, we're replacing in-person meeting with something. And making the decision to go to streaming was easy for us. Most of the churches that I knew at the time went for Zoom and similar tools, which you might call the ultimate live experience, where effectively we go to a meeting place, happens to be digital, and then we do something. Everybody sees and everybody hears everybody else, and perhaps that was streamed as well. We made different choices. We took what you might call a more reflective service into that exact world. So we have simple services, also more creative services, where it seems like the natural thing to do is for everyone to interact with everyone. We use those conferencing kind of tools, both teleconferencing and video conferencing, for some of those kind of things. But our main core Sunday service, we said, would be a bit more produced, because that felt more safe for people. They could step into a world mediated by trusted tools like Facebook and YouTube and not feel exposed, not feel that they had to start worrying about, what's my background? Have I got the technology? And so it was participative and open, and hopefully non-threatening, hopefully familiar. And so, of course, we learned then about this idea of live. And over the weeks and months, we learned about the way that people share experiences online. Then as we began to return to physical church, and we have the fact that we just don't have good broadband in any of our churches, we can't get a reliable stream anywhere. So in a sense, some of our decisions have been driven by that, and your context may be different. But that's also shaped the priority of how we've thought about both digital and in person. And we're seeing those as quite complementary. So actually, that online digital service experience that we've been delivering, where we've tried to have, if you like, a bit of the live experience, we've tried to wrap it around with some of the meeting characteristics of regular services, having a chat room for after the service and so on. That's begun to pull apart in a good way, because that in-person interaction is much more familiar and easy for most people. I'm going to say most people in person. Whereas in that online experience, we see that there are different reasons for people to be there and different ways that people interact. So actually, the live interaction has been less significant, but the fact that it's a live service seems to have been important to people. So we've found that people have shared content. I've found that there are many more conversations which start with a particular service. And people often say that it's the most recent service, but often when you hear what they're describing, it's perhaps from a few weeks ago. Because in that digital world, Now, and live just isn't significant in quite the same way. So we've become less focused on the live broadcast. We've stuck to a live paradigm. We have the tools, we have the technology and experience, and we like that environment. But perhaps we're less focused on that live experience. Obviously, when we are interacting live, we try and connect with people through the tools provided in YouTube and Facebook. But I would say that's simply become less significant than slightly more time displaced activities, where conversations and emails and connections are mediated through that content that's shared. But we're not in control of that. People are helping themselves. So that's where we are, and it's definitely a work in progress for us. Let's go to that next question, or that next question of balance between the more liturgical and the more topical. And there's a question: should a digital service feel like an in-person service? And there isn't a right answer. Again, I want to stress there isn't the right answer. You can't Google that and somebody gives you the exact right answer and you just do that. It's a matter of choice. A digital service can feel very like an in-person service. It can look very like an in-person service, and it can be utterly different. So it's a question of choice. My own background in churches before I was ordained isn't at all formal and liturgical. That certainly wasn't an area of expertise for me, but my present churches, and indeed my previous context, were rather more formal. They tend to work in that way. And also, near the beginning of the lockdown, the Church of England resourced and supported churches in that area. So, for example, St Martin in the Fields provided weekly hymn and song recordings with all the information to go with it, or recently with licensing information, so you could embed that in services. And those have followed the seasonal lectionary of Bible readings. They've predominantly been more traditional hymns and songs, weighted very much towards the traditional end of the spectrum. So although there's been plenty of contemporary songs and hymns used, they tend to be contemporary in the sense of written relatively recently, but usually in a more hymn than song form. So for practical reasons, but also just general comforts for everyone, I've tended to go with a general approach where our digital services have followed familiar forms, but well, it became clear really quite early that that approach delighted church members because they saw what they wanted to see, which was kind of this experience that we value and treasure. We're getting something of that. But it wasn't so ideal for more fringe members and others where we don't know the connection. So we've steered a little bit towards a topical approach. We've just chosen one way of doing that. So we've chosen to say each week we should have one key question drawn out by the reading, so we know that the talk, the sermon, is going to major on one particular question, not a question ideally that we've just come up with, but a question that seems to resonate with actual questions that people have. So then each service may use those traditional elements. It will feel simple and straightforward. It will feel somewhat liturgical, but we're able to shape it around the topics. So that's our balance point, if you like. We've chosen to make the motivation for that online content really very topical, so that we're building up a library of content that we know people are sharing, and we're able to make those references. But we haven't started joining the dots yet, and we know that we'll need to. We know that we will need to start to invest in finding better ways and more ways of simply taking that content as it grows and making it more accessible, just as it's naturally already shared by some people, but to make it useful to people as part of our ministry to one another under God. So as we find a new normal, God willing, as the present time is changing, as we hopefully see more unlocking of society generally, we'll be, I think, continuing to rethink how our digital offering sits alongside our in-person and hybrid offerings and discovering balance points as we go. And I suspect that we may begin to go much more topical and a little less liturgical, if you like, just for one practical reason, that we find that shorter services tend to get shared more widely. Funny that. So, what about the question of style? And I'm highlighting consistency and creativity as these points that we need to find a balance between. should you have a consistency so people know exactly what to expect and find it week after week? Or should you aim for creativity, because the digital space has all of these options and you can't necessarily, and perhaps shouldn't, always have the same style. You can lean more into video and all sorts of exciting areas. You can go live out in the streets. So many possibilities are opened up where you don't want consistency, because that creativity shouldn't end up with settling in, or we've got this new form where we always start with going live to someone in the street and an actual live vox pop. That sort of thing is great fun to do once, but you wouldn't want it to be every time. So where should you sit between those two places? And without a doubt, we've chosen a high level of consistency at the core, but we chose, again, I think within 3 or 4 months, to try and express that consistency by framing our services in a consistent and predictable way, by signaling what we were doing within a service in a simple way, which hopefully was familiar for members of the congregation, but also for others, so people hopefully don't feel, what on earth is going on here? There's praying happening, and hopefully that's indicated on the screen in some way. So we've had consistency about delivery, but not a robust, simple, consistent, the online service is exactly the same as an in-person service. So we've kept those two, and actually gradually I would say they're diverging. So just as I was mentioning with the previous point of balance, I suspect that as we move forward, there'll be further movement away from consistency, not completely, not abandoning consistency, but if you like, having more of a branding consistency approach, because that helps people to understand and be oriented. They know that it's us, and they can trust that experience, but maybe leaning more into the creativity. But we have limited resources. So I'm excited by the vision, something I've heard Brian talking about more than once, of churches collaborating and sharing skills and resources. And there have been some amazing things done, but there's a tendency for those things to emanate from larger and better resourced churches. I think there's huge potential of finding new ways of interacting and using this question of digital services and the balance between the more creative and the more consistent by working together, which is an exciting thing that so often we just don't do that as churches. So on to my final point, which is those two mindsets. And to be fair, I'm not really suggesting a balance point here. I'm more highlighting a personal preference. So I've talked about mapping and exploring. Those are two mindsets. Do we see the digital realm as largely unknown territory where we want to go and discover it? We want to draw a map, work out what connects to what, find out what the right labels are so that we feel comfortable in that space and can then learn how it fits together and just function effectively in that space now well mapped out. So our personal map has just moved to embrace digital. Or are we explorers who want to go into new cultural spaces, changing our views as we do so and going deep? And in my view, the church needs both. Indeed, I think the church has always had both. What's new here is not that mindset, it's just the domain it's being applied to in that digital space. But I do think that when we don't recognize those two preferences, they can very easily clash. So naming that and recognizing it is important. I know that by nature and by inclination and by experience and in all sorts of ways, I'm an explorer. I absolutely want to go and find new worlds. And I'm probably happiest just being dropped into a completely unfamiliar situation and to orient myself, find out who's here. What are they like? What do people do around here? How can I then orient myself and be effective in that world? And I could try and be theological and say that's an incarnational approach. But to be honest, I think that's theologizing something which is just a personal inclination. And I also know that in parish ministry, often mapping is much more the order of the day because we have something finite and fixed. We have, quote, our own point on the map. We have a geographic point on the map, and then we now have through digital tools, like there are relational points being added to that, but the focus tends to be on a community. So then mapping is really important because going into detail and creating one view that is consistent and gradually uses these other tools, that's a key skill. So in my particular context, I've tried to make sure that the core team who've picked up this digital challenge have different inclinations. So between us, we're working together and not trying to find some compromise, because really those are two different mindsets. And if you blend them together, you simply represent nobody. But to find room for both of those to be expressed in our digital work. So perhaps I've tended to be the one who's happy to take risks, to go out further and to do more of that engagement. There are others who are much more comfortable thinking of this digital space and our existing congregations and relationships. And then some who work in both of those places. So I think, well, it's early days, but recognizing those two mindsets, letting each do its work, I think is critical to every church if we're going to embrace all the positive aspects of the change which has come and which is potentially welcome in a horrific situation. But the fact we've discovered change means that as the body of Christ, we have all of these opportunities as we press on. So once more, I just want to say that you might have been expecting that I'd give you lots and lots of answers. I hope I've given you some good and useful questions and those 4 balance points, in one case inclinations, that might inform your conversations with your congregations. So I'm going to look for Brian to reappear. There you are.
Yeah, that was really helpful, Jeremy. And I think the point of those balance points and how we actually do that is really interesting. And I'm going to come back to you afterwards, so you can start thinking about, obviously, your role is about to change, and you've spent this last kind of 15 months with congregations bringing them to this point. And I think one of the things we all worry about in ministry is what happens when the driver behind that is called elsewhere or moves elsewhere. So I'm giving you fair warning. We're coming back to that question at the end, so you can have a little think about that one first. And yeah, but thank you, and we're going to invite Neil to come and share with us. As we know, Neil is our cable and tech guru for all things cameras. It looks like he's got a lightsaber behind him today as well, over his shoulder. But Neil's going to share something about that kind of production of this, thinking about what Jeremy's brought and how we can put that into real life as well. So Neil, thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. First of all, Jeremy, the aughties, is that a thing? The aughties? I assume you mean the kind of 2000s-ish. I've never heard that phrase before. We can discuss that in the Q&A a little bit later on. Brian used the word production. And that seems actually quite a technical and austere word, and indeed it doesn't seem appropriate almost to think about in a church context that church worship would be a production. But of course, if you're at the tech end of all of these things, that's exactly what it is. It must have a structure, it must have a team, it must have a beginning, middle, and an end, it must have a sense of flow. It must have folks who know what they're doing and when they're doing it. And so I might use the word production just throughout what I'm saying today, but I don't mean to say that and it's any less meaningful as a worship service. It's just a helpful word I think we can use today to describe the elements that happen perhaps in the back row in church as we look to live stream something. So live streaming begins, of course, before one goes live. And that might involve, of course, the tech team along with anyone else who arrives before the service starts, those preparing hospitality, welcome team, the musicians, or whatever will all be arriving ahead of the service, and indeed the tech team will do that too. One hopes by this time they have an order of service from whoever is presiding, so that they can be one step ahead. And I'll be talking about one step ahead quite frequently. As a way just to keep on the ball and to keep relaxed, actually, about where you are in the process. You want to be starting up all your gear so that it's ready to go. And you want to be live streaming before the service starts. We live stream maybe about 10 minutes before the service starts. We've made a little movie that plays with some songs that the congregation have sung in the past and some slideshow of a church life, and so we play that before, and we do that because people arrive typically before the service starts. And if you start live streaming at 10:59 and 55 seconds, people are just going to be hitting refresh on your web page a lot, wondering, is it broken? Is it working? You're going to start getting text messages. I can't see the live stream. So we give people a good 10 minutes to feel connected, right? I can see the live stream ready. I can relax. I can get myself set and ready for worship. I know other congregations have a rolling PowerPoint of news and intimations before the service starts to keep folks interested and engaged, and perhaps they save some time by not having to read those out verbatim during the service. And I'm sure the congregation inside the building will be seeing a similar PowerPoint of the same thing. So whatever it is, it might even just be a live camera with low volume of people arriving, and that's fine too, whatever works for you. If it is your habit, and I'm talking here to worship leaders now, if it's your habit to pray with the worship team before service, that's great. Please don't forget to include the tech team. They are part of your worship delivery. They are enabling worship to happen for those at a distance, for those who need an induction loop, for those who need to see rather than hear, for those who need to hear rather than see. They are worship enablers, and I think it's very appropriate that they are part of your prayer ministry. Now, they may be quite busy just getting ready for the moment that you walk in the door, but that doesn't mean they cannot be prayed with or send a representative with to your prayer huddle, or indeed just be prayed for by name out loud. So don't forget the tech team. They are an essential part of your worship ministry. I think it's important that ultimately you have an agreed plan about when the action starts. So in our congregation, the Bible comes in carried by the church officer, and the congregation will stand. That's just our habit and our tradition. But of course, that signals for us, okay, we're ready. Cameras live, sound alive. And as the Bible moves to the lectern and followed by the minister, we know that we're ready to go. Some churches have countdown timers. Perhaps you see that more often in the US ministries. We tried that in our congregation. The minister asked for a countdown timer because he saw it somewhere else. I thought, that's great. Okay, no problem. But I'm only giving you a timer if something happens when it gets to 0. And of course, we were the first Sunday we used it. We got to 0, which was with a 10:30 start. So that was 10:30, and nothing happened. Nobody came in because we're not actually used to starting on time. That's the reason I mentioned it. And it was a good 3 or 4 minutes before the service began, and that's actually just our norm. And we never used a timer again. However, in a different congregation, the minister was a former policeman. And at 10:59, the doors opened, and like clockwork, the procession began. So different congregations have different styles. You'll know how yours works, and if you want to use a countdown timer, that's fine too, to signal going live. Again, talking to you as worship leaders, please don't forget to welcome those watching online. You may want to pre-arrange with your tech team which camera, if you have multiple cameras, is going to be live at that point, so that you can look them in the eye, right down the lens of the camera, and address them and say, good morning. You are very welcome to worship this morning. Thank you for joining us. And you may want to use that throughout the service. Again, just agree where you can with your tech team, if you've got multiple cameras, which camera is the down the lens camera, so that you can look straight at it and look really at those who are watching online. Otherwise, you should feel free to look around at other parts of your congregation. Just don't forget the lens for those who are watching online. So back to the tech team. Hopefully you have an order of service and you're ready with things to go. Once the service begins, things begin to slow down, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. But I'm sure adrenaline will be running high as the moment of going live occurs. But actually, once we begin with prayers and songs and readings, these take moments and time to deliver. And during that time, you can be looking at your order of service, getting the next thing ready. So if you have multiple cameras, for example, it may be that after a bidding prayer, that you know there's going to be hymn number 1. So maybe that's a time to get camera 2 ready on the organ manual, or whatever you're going to do for this. And so camera 2 is ready on the organist. And so when the praise is announced, you can then cut to camera 2 because it's ready. And off you go into your hymn, and you might be showing song words at that point as well. As the hymn progresses, you'll know that they're going back to the worship leader after that. So you want to see where he or she has gone, and maybe they're at the lectern now or at a reading desk. You just get camera ready so that when the time comes for the hymn to be over, you're now ready on the next phase of the sermon. I always say to folks who are in tech duty, please don't try to go to church at the same time you have a job to do. You are forgiven, and if not by your pastor, certainly by me, for not engaging in the service. Why? Because you've got a job to do, and it's really important you concentrate well on that job in hand. In the same way, perhaps a church officer has to be out of the sanctuary for key moments as they make preparations or tidy up. Maybe your Sunday school or junior church leaders miss half the service because they're out with the young folks. Maybe those who prepare hospitality have to leave 10 minutes before the end. Various folks have various jobs, which means they will miss out on parts of the service. And you will feel, because you're physically present, oh, actually, I can worship and be part of the service at the same time as doing the tech job. And actually, that's really hard to do. If you focus too much on worship, then you may miss out an element of what you have to do next, or you've forgotten something, or you're behind the curve when suddenly a hymn is announced and you're nowhere near ready because you are deep in the moment. I think you have to excuse yourself from the service, even though you're physically present, so that you can concentrate wholeheartedly on your task. Of course, because you're live streaming and no doubt recording it, if you do want to catch the service again, then you've got the recording just there and you can watch it again at your leisure. It's another good reason why you might want to have a rota so that you can attend worship sitting in the pew as a congregant rather than as someone who is working at the back. So coming back to the flow of the service, you want to think about shots and angles and pace, and you may have a style that works for you. I might suggest that whatever style that you adopt, maybe you always dissolve or mix between shots. Maybe during a prayer, you always focus on the flowers or a stained glass window or something beautiful in your sanctuary rather than necessarily people with heads bowed. That you adopt that approach consistently, no matter who's on the tech desk that week. And so you might want to have a meeting at some point that agrees that, rather than what could be sometimes jarring is, person A decides that during a hymn we want to see people singing with open mouths, and person B decides we're going to look at stained glass. And there's an inconsistency week on, week out. Now, one wouldn't want to stifle creativity unnecessarily, but I think that has to be balanced with consistency. So however you creatively want to do that and consistently, then agree that with the team, and perhaps a prior meeting beforehand would be good, just to think about how you're going to do that. And on that theme, you might want to think about the sensitivities of the folks who are participating in worship. It's okay for the worship leader and pastor to be fully on screen. They've signed up to it, perhaps unwillingly when they first took on the charge, who knows, but ultimately they know they are front and center, so them appearing on camera is going to be part and parcel of their being there. But those people who are sitting in pews and seats aren't imagining themselves to be the focus of attention, and perhaps the attention of a camera might be unwanted. And so during times of prayer or the offering or during communion, that might be a time to draw back and not actually focus on individuals. So maybe a nice wide shot of things happening, so we're not seeing detail. Nobody wants to see how much people are putting in the offering. What color was that note? Nobody cares about these things. But you pull back, or perhaps if you have stained glass or flowers or banners, or if you have musicians focusing on their instrumentation or fingering, whatever it might be, think about how you're going to tackle that, and again, do it consistently. As you get used to your kit, you may decide you want to slowly pull out, slowly pan across, slightly defocus. These are all creative things you can do once you feel a bit more relaxed. It might be you just go to PowerPoint slides for song words or whatever it might be. But think creatively, but sensitively about how you're going to tackle perhaps more personal moments during the service. I want to say a word or two about disaster planning. Things will go wrong, and you know what? It's absolutely okay. If you are a worship leader and pastor, please say this out loud to your tech team. It doesn't matter if things go wrong, because things will go wrong. And nobody is expecting 100% BBC level performance. In fact, it goes wrong for them too, and we all know it. So please forgive them ahead of time. It can be stressful and anxiety-inducing being at the back because you feel, gosh, this whole live stream rests on me doing my job. And it does. Concentrate hard, work hard to the best of your efforts, but please don't flay yourself if things happen, because they surely will. Swallow hard and move along. And pastors, please forgive. There's nothing worse than being called out from the front of the church at the back. Oh, I don't think we were on the right camera there. If a wrong camera shot happened, people saw it. They certainly won't need it called out from the front during worship. I've seen it happen. Please give your team all the grace you can manage from the back. And if you're at the back, give yourself all the grace you can muster when things don't go according to plan. Regroup, regather, and move on. I always have a safety shot. Usually it's just a wide shot of the whole sanctuary because we have multiple cameras. And if things are going wrong, I'm not sure what the place is or what the plot is, I go to the wide shot because that carries everything. I take a breath and I think, right, okay, there's a wide shot. And frankly, if that wide shot is on for the next 20 minutes, it's fine. It really is. We can hear things, and we can see things. They might be totally tiny, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to regroup. I'm going to give myself a break and get myself sorted and move on to where the next part of the service. Technology will fail too, and if that happens, adapt as best you can. If one camera goes down, okay, just live with another one. If only one microphone ends up working, then what I tend to do is I wait until a hymn, then I'll walk down to the front. I'll tell the minister, only the lectern's working. Is it okay if you deliver the rest of the service from there? Because the folks at home won't hear you if you go into the pulpit. And I'm sure they'll be most accommodating to do that. Let them know what's happening. They'll move to the lectern, and then you'll carry on. Sometimes sound can go. Sound is the most awful thing to go, because without sound, vision is difficult and understanding is difficult. If your cameras go down, on the other hand, you could broadcast an audio-only service. That's fine. A lot of the essence of a service is delivered over audio, the sermon, the songs, the prayers, the readings. So if you ended up audio-only, that's fine. If the internet goes down entirely and you can't stream, okay. Nothing you can do about it, and don't worry about it. What to do is carry on the service as normal. If you're able to record it in your own building, so you've got a little SD card, then you have an MP4 recorder or something. You maybe do that anyway for the recording later. Then record the whole thing, and then perhaps when you get home later, you can upload that to YouTube or Vimeo or wherever you put your recordings, and people can watch it later. Gold standard would be if you can get a message onto your webpage to say, look, our internet's gone down, we'll get the recording up by 2 o'clock, sorry about that, and then move on. Concentrate on the rest of the service and just go through it. Sometimes even all technology breaks down, and we have a plan for that too. In our own congregation, we all break out, the books with all the words in them. The hymn books, that's right, and the Bibles with all the words. We break out books and Bibles. The minister will talk loudly to the back of the hall, just like they did 100 years ago when there were no microphones and no nothing, and we will still carry on. We might take a 5-minute break before we start, because the songs that the minister had chosen might not be in the hymn book, so he'll just choose different songs that we've got there. Whether or not we have working music doesn't matter. We will just sing. Someone will start us off in the precentor style, and we will carry on. We won't abandon worship just because there's no electricity. We will carry on and have a great worship experience and time together. Don't let anything dissuade you that worship is a primary activity. Other things are ancillary and they're helpful, of course they are, but you're there to worship. But if you have a plan in your head, that's 99% of the battle. It's when you feel something unexpected has come along and you don't know what you're going to do about it, when you perhaps begin to feel a bit uneasy about things. But have in your mind, disasters happen. What will we do about it? Better still, if you can have, again, at one of your pre-meetings, talking with the worship leader, if the internet goes down, we're going to do this. If the power goes out, we're going to do that. If the heating goes off, we're going to keep our jackets on. We're going to do our very best to carry on. What would be the absolute worst that would cause you to abandon the building and say, we can't do worship today? Only structural problems, the roof's falling down. And then go worship in your garden instead. Let it carry on. Nearly there. We've made it through the end of the service. We've said our amens. For the first perhaps 6 or so weeks of our live streaming, we just cut to black. We killed the stream and that was it. We said amen. And it wasn't long before we got feedback from our online viewers about how cold and harsh that was. And they've been worshipping along with us, watching online, and then suddenly black and the stream goes dead just after amen. We need to bring people down as much as we have brought them up. And so for us now, we leave the cameras rolling. We drop all the mics that are audio, vocal mics, and the band will continue playing, or the organist will continue playing. We leave one mic open so we can continue to hear that. We draw back wide in our cameras. People can see folks getting up out their seats and beginning to leave and mill about. And just the general closing and milling about that is the end of the service. Of course, in these COVID times, we have to go out in a regimented fashion. It's not quite as relaxed as it has been, but we will return to that surely one day. But have a closing scheme and plan in mind. You might, at the end of that, go back to your PowerPoint slides. You might have a slide that says, thank you for worshipping with us this morning. And you can watch this again in our YouTube channel or look forward to seeing you next week. And then we do a slow fade to black. And even then, I leave black on for about 2 or 3 minutes before I cut the stream. Again, just as part of that winding down, so that as we've got into black, we suddenly don't have the web page going stream not found, buffering as it tries to figure out what's gone wrong because we've just killed the stream. And then maybe after 2 or 3 minutes, I'll press the stop streaming button and just begin to bring people back down again. And then get your recording, get it online as soon as you can. Not everybody can make it, live or not, live streamed or not live streamed. If you can't make 11 o'clock, you still can't make 11 o'clock. So however quickly you can get the service online for people who need to time shift. Perhaps they've been shift working, perhaps they've been working elsewhere, perhaps they've had to look after somebody, and they'll watch that later on in the week and finish off your closing work, ready again to start the next week. You will get into a pattern. If you're new to live streaming, you've got 52 of these a year, by and large, plus a few extras, so you'll soon get into the swing of things. But don't worry, don't get anxious. If something didn't go right fully one week, then okay, next week we'll try again and we'll remember what didn't quite work and we'll work hard about conquering that the week after. So those are my top tips, I guess, from some years of experience of being the person at the back, of pushing buttons, of having things gone wrong, of seeing a variety of worship leaders and bands and interactions. I'm sure you'll all have your own stories to tell as well. But that's it from me for the moment.
Thanks, Neil. That's been really helpful. I think we've all... I noticed Jeremy and I both nodding at lots of points when you talked about disaster planning. Although your disasters are far more thought out than ours, which doesn't surprise me in any way, shape or form. We would have to go and find and remember which cupboard under the pile of stuff are the hymn books and the Bibles now stored? So there's a bit more of a challenge there for some of us. But that was really, really helpful. And I think you're for me, what was really helpful was you're talking about bringing people back down after worship as well, into a space where they can go on with the rest of their day. And for me, when you were speaking, I found that particularly jumping in my mind to funerals, which is what we're broadcasting an awful lot more of now for various reasons. And actually, you have to allow people that journey with them, to see the family going out and then to sit with the music. And it's really important, isn't it, that we don't just go, right, you're done, thanks very much, see you next week, or never. So I think all these planning things are really, really important. Definitely. So, Jeremy, I'm coming back to this question about how we move forward, because obviously you are, moving on from the parishes that you're there at the moment. They have been live streaming or as live streaming as you were talking about earlier. Where does that go from here? Is there a team? Is there a plan in place, or are you just running and taking the computer with you under your arm?
So I think for different churches, the idea of succession planning is sometimes kind of works and sometimes doesn't. In a Church of England context, in a sense, having resigned, I have no interest technically or legally or sort of so on in the future. But the flip side of that is right at the beginning of streaming, when I wasn't, to be honest, thinking of moving on particularly then, or perhaps it was sort of a vague thought that probably in not too many years I would be. Nevertheless, that thought of continuity was important. So in the very first week of lockdown, I did the thing which seemed easiest to me, which I don't think I'd ever live streamed before, but I'm fairly geeky, and so I found this thing called OBS, and I found how to plug this into this, and kind of get through. And from that experience, I could feel that going in that direction means that I then become probably the single point of failure, the single point of expertise, and anybody I bring into that, we're not really going to build capability. So I immediately moved to online production platforms and tried a couple, and stuck with the one we're using for today, called StreamYard, precisely because I could then bring a number of other people. So they're not spending their time thinking about how does this all work, but they've naturally got involved, and so I'm hoping that the possibilities then feel easier for people. But at the same time, I would say the default within the congregations, I would say 90% of the people in the congregations of the churches are still really thinking about, there's this strange situation, and there's this digital thing, and then there's normality. So I don't want to pretend that there's a large group of people who've been thinking about what digital means for these churches into the future. But there are key people who are, if not necessarily obsessed by it, but interested in that question. So I think my part of my job in my remaining weeks, not so many now, here, is to help to make sure that those people don't kind of grab that ball and say, well, digital is ours now. It was sort of somehow Jeremy's thing. Or don't get lost because everyone says, oh, we don't need any of that stuff now. But keep that conversation going forward. So I hope and expect that there'll still be an online offering. I have no stake or influence in that, but I hope I've carefully prepared so that that's a possibility, and nothing falls apart because I'm not here.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the ministers' many fears of what happens when you go, when you've got this new thing that, oh, excuse me, somebody's now phoning me. Who would have thought? Nobody ever uses, see this whole phone thing that you spoke about the other week, Jeremy. No one ever uses it in my house. Apparently they do today. But it's always a fear, isn't it? How do you move on? How do you plan for that? Because what can seem really important to some might be something that's just put up with by others, and a minister's hobby or something that they enjoy doing. So we suffer it rather than
But I think also
participate.
there's that why question. So one of the reasons why I'm very interested in these sort of balance points and thinking about those deliberately is that's a help to future change, because either we're trying to discover the right answer and it's there and we're done, or we're trying to engage missionally in a world. In truth, we need to do both of those things. Helping to have those frameworks to go back to some of the whys is helpful, because otherwise we default to the what. I'm sure there are plenty of churches where there is some object in the church everybody assumes has to be there, and somebody must know what it is, but it's never used, but it's always there. Churches do that very easily. In this digital domain, I think there's a danger that we just go, oh, we've now got our pattern and our shape and we're doing it. That's really helpful. It's helpful for resilience. But the why, what was the thinking behind that? Where are we trying to go with that? Where are the places as a church we're trying to get to, that this tool is operating in a different way? Those conversations have to be happening for digital to be a real space of opportunity for our churches.
And Neil, your church has gone through changes over the years, and you had a very enthusiastic minister who was into kind of new technology, or into getting you to be into new technology, and saw the vision of it. How did that change for you when you went into a period kind of post that ministry?
I mean, in some ways, it became part of the norm, and indeed, there was some degree of amusement as we were vacant for a bit, and as we had locums, we would let them know that we do live streaming, and they say, "What if I don't want to be live streamed?" I said, "Well, you'll not be our locum, and it's not okay. We're not going to turn this off. You're just not the right person for us in that case," and so it became it became part and parcel of our church, in the same way that our carpet is red and our chairs are green, that this is how we are, and we're not changing that when you come. And indeed, as our parish profile had gone out, live streaming is part and parcel of what we are about, and you need to be aware of that if you are looking to apply to be the minister here, because as a Kirk session, we've agreed this is our way forward, and as a congregation, we've been doing it for years, and we have a congregation online who don't come to our building, and so we're not going to stop that. So it's now just embedded in the life and worship of our church. But when we do have folks coming in for the odd week, when again during our vacancy or the minister's on holiday, again it's important to say up front, we do this live. So that you're aware, and here are some top tips that would to help you get the most out of your experience. I should say about our current locum, Derek, and Derek won't mind me saying this if you're watching, Derek. Hi. Derek was initially not used to live streaming when he came with us, and had certain reservations about that. We'll go gently. We'll take it week by week, and I think he would be the first to say how much he has enjoyed being part of a congregation that live streams, how much he's enjoyed engaging with the folks that are online. Of course, this happened slightly pre-pandemic, and it was even more so pandemic, and he's now the one coming to me with, could we do this? Could we do that? Could we do the other? And has really embraced it, and he would say himself he's been in a journey through this time, and one that he's thoroughly enjoyed, actually, from being tentative at the beginning. So, yes, I mean, it truly is a transformational thing, but it comes from the mindset, I think, and a congregation's determinedness to go ahead and to do it.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it can't be one person's hobby.
Yeah,
and that's the person who flies the flag for online church. It becomes embedded in your congregation's lifestyle as much as you have tea afterwards and you're welcomed at the door.
And I think that's the challenge as we come out of this pandemic, the fact that we do have people who are kind of thrown into it and flung into it with no warning, and we haven't had time to train other people or to grow a team. We've just been treading water, and we've been trying to keep our head above that as we go forward. And now, this is why we wanted to do this Church Tech Chat. It's now about thinking about why we're doing it. We might have some experience, but why are we going to do this, and why are we going to keep it going?
I think one one thing that we have to somehow, it's back to this balance and tension. In a way, we have to give people comfort that these technologies, these modes of operating, these ways of extending worship are valuable and beneficial, and there's something precious and important there. And we have to give some people a sense of discomfort because there is a striving to do, there's discovery to do, and there needs to be motivation for that, and that's exciting, but it can be draining. So I think you were saying at the beginning, there's a tendency now to feel really, really drained. Neil, you're ready for retirement any year now. But it is, again, I think we should take seriously, there's a long haul. And in a way, the pandemic has enabled the start of change. And some of that change has been hugely detrimental, perhaps. And some of that change holds lots and lots of possibilities. It will get more difficult to make those possibilities into reality unless we kind of keep the faith on this. So that's why I'm excited to be part of this.
And I think when we get back to more churches being open again and more activities being on, I think it's, and we'll go back to my word about collaboration, I think it's going to be more difficult for every church to sustain this level of kind of online presence and online development. And we need to be looking at this together as collaboratively as possible, so that we can share ideas, share responsibility, share creativity, and hopefully make something happen really, really well. I want to come to one comment that Neil's made. I think, Robert, hopefully we answered your comment. I see that Jeremy magically answered it when he was speaking, which was very impressive. But Neil makes a really interesting comment that online only seems in some respects to offer more possibilities than hybrid, where we're constrained by technology issues and culture. And I think that's a really interesting point, because online, hybrid, where do we have relationship within that? Because in whatever model we need relationship, how do we do that truly online? I think there's a lot to unpack in that, isn't there, Neil?
Absolutely, and there's no doubt that hybrid is technologically more difficult than purely online streaming, or indeed purely regular worship without any tech at the back at all. I would carry out a vision of hybrid becoming the norm for congregations, having the mixture of how do you get the collegiate nature of Zoom with the ease of live streaming, because Zoom has a two-way mechanism to it, and many churches have been used to that. When they go to live streaming, they go back to one way, and naturally, anyone leading at the front will have a natural focus for the people sitting in pews right in front of them. But what would it be like at the end of a service for the minister to walk up to a 55-inch TV with a Zoom screen and say, "Hi, folks, how did you enjoy the service? You can see behind me the folks having tea and coffee. How are you getting on?" Put a little headset on and chat to the folks on Zoom who's been watching that service afterwards. Perhaps there might be 2 or 3 headsets or something that could work that enables people who are having tea and coffee behind me here to chat to the folks on Zoom and say, "Oh, I haven't seen you for a little while." How would that be? How could it be? Technologically, it can be. It just requires some wherewithal, some creativity, and probably some nudging to people think you're not mad. This could be a thing. But I've got a vision that all these things can happen, and it would just require a small group to think, "Yeah, okay, I think that could happen. Let's give it a shot, and see how that pans out." I think that'll be wonderful.
And I think similar to that, I mean, again, in a way, I was cheating a bit in my little session because I was drawing away from what's really difficult for us at the moment, which is an extended live in-person hybrid experience. I see all the difficulties and all the excitements and possibilities, but we don't have broadband, we don't have the kit, so that can't happen. So back to that point that was being made about online and hybrid, I think those two each are really important. And I think as churches, we have to embrace the hybrid in order for that heartbeat of the church that is our main Sunday gathering to be inclusive and to open its arms, open its doors really widely, so we're including people. And I think there is a separate thing about existing in that online world. And I mentioned when I was in theological training, there was a sense somehow there are new movements afoot, and some of that is about moving away from a very Sunday-centric church to a faith that is operational and a community that is connected through the week. And I think that's the online space is giving us a sight of that. And the way into that is, for many churches, I think, going to be that what we record or what we use on a Sunday, we can start to feed into a wider online set of relationships and begin to make that part of our lifeblood. I love what you said, Neil, about saying this is what we do. This is not negotiable. We've decided as a congregation we are doing this and we're committing to this. Mm-hmm. I think that's something we all need to do. I'm certainly going to see if I can get my parishes to sign up and just say, yeah, we're committed to this now. We're not sure how we're going to do it, but we're committed to it.
Yeah. And I think that's it. We don't need to know how we're going to do everything to start with. If we waited till we knew how we were going to do things, there would never be a right time to do anything in life. You know, if we waited until we were in a place as a family to have children, you'd never have children. Or if you waited to do anything, sometimes you need to just take a step forward. And Jeremy, your point that, you know, sometimes there has to be that discomfort, you know, between things. You know, it reminds me that the gospel is actually full of bits of discomfort. It's not a comfortable read, and I think when we run the danger in church too often of that big showcase Sunday event of being comfortable for us, of being a safe space. And that's not that it's wrong that we enjoy it and we get what we do, but equally we shouldn't create that just to suit our expectations and our likes and the things that make us feel warm and fuzzy on a Sunday morning, thinking about Jesus being a sunbeam or wanting me as a sunbeam or whatever it is that he wants. You know, we need to think about how we can challenge ourselves to reach new people in new ways. Because as I said, people aren't breaking down our doors on a Sunday morning to get there, even with Neil's red carpet and green seats. And red and green should never be seen, Neil.
Actually, it's a green carpet and green seats. I don't know why.
Oh, well, that's fine. That's fine.
Talking off the cuff. It is, of course, Carter approved green carpet and green.
That's okay then. But Joe, you know, we do have to get a bit of realism that we do need to look critically sometimes at the things that we've done and the things that we are able to do as church and look at how we take them forward as church. We've got a new opportunity here, and it would be wonderful to be able to use it to further the kingdom. Guys, thank you as always. I think we're going to hopefully get some of Jeremy's slides. I think that balancing one in particular, and we'll try and put that on the Church Tech Chat page as well, because I think that was really, really helpful for me to think through some of these items as well. So thank you for joining us today. We're going to be here for our 6th and last in this series of Church Tech Chats, because it will be summer then, and Jeremy is going to be moving, and all those books behind him are going to be in boxes, probably. I think the rate he's going, they might be in the back of the car driving down. But yeah, we will hopefully be able to come back together in the autumn and do some more of this and some more of these conversations. But for next week, we're talking about this just being the beginning, a springboard into something new for our churches, for your church, and for building the kingdom. So we hope that you have a fantastic week. We hope that we see you next Thursday, the 24th of June, 1 p.m, here on the Church Tech Chat Facebook. That doesn't get easier to say. The Church Tech Chat Facebook page and YouTube channel, and you can join in the conversation there. Thanks to those who joined us live today, and if you're joining us on demand, thank you as well. We'll see you all next Thursday. Take care. God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye.